What's up, guys? Welcome to the third episode of the Jaxel Power Not So Hour. In the last episode, I discussed week tournament organizers, and thankfully, the responses to that video were fairly positive. I was actually expecting a lot of negative feedback. Um, I also want to thank Event Hubs for giving it a chance and posting it in their news feed. Sadly, it didn't get the traction I had hoped, so I'm making a few format changes. Instead of doing an hour-long show discussing multiple topics, I'm going to try to keep number of topics to a minimum and get through them a bit quicker. In addition, I actually wrote everything I'm going to say down, so this is scripted and I have them coming to me through a teleprompter right now. So for today's episode, I want to answer a question posted in the YouTube comments from last week. Melancholyhead 1000 asks, why is the 3D fighting game community not as big as 2D? What things can the 3D community do to increase their size and presence in the community overall? Now, I get a lot of questions and comments for my videos, and I hope to get through most of them in future episodes. But this question in particular hits home for me because of my background in the fighting game community. Before I get to answering Melancholyhead's questions, some of you new viewers may be asking, who the hell is this guy? What gives him the credibility to answer these questions? Well, my name is Jason Axelrod. You may also know me as Jaxel or Jaxelrod. In my youth, I had been a top-ranking player in many video games, but my first entry into the competitive fighting game circuit began with Soul Calibur 2. At its peak, Soul Calibur 2 was one of the most popular, if not the most popular, fighting game in America. At my best, I'd like to think I was one of the best talent players in the country. Since then, I've fallen out of practice and I don't really play competitive fighting games anymore. In 2009, after the release of Soul Calibur 4, I launched 8wayrun.com, which has since become the home for the competitive Soul Calibur community for most English-speaking countries. Eventually, I branched off into more than just Soul Calibur, broadcasting live tournament streams for many fighting games, including Street Fighter 4 and Marvel vs. Capcom 3, all on my Twitch channel. I have about 5,000 videos on my YouTube channel dedicated almost exclusively to video games and similar ilk. You guys are probably watching this on that video, on that channel, that is. Now, although my background is in 3D fighting games, because of all the videos I release and the streams I produce, I watch close to 10 hours of 2D fighting games a week. At the same time, I probably play at most 30 minutes of Virtua Fighter, a 3D fighting game, a month. Although I don't play 2D fighting games often, because so much of what I do involves the mindset of those who watch 2D fighting games, I'd like to think I'm acutely aware of this topic. So to remind you viewers who have already forgotten, today's question asks, why are 3D fighting games not as popular as 2D fighting games? It's a tough question to answer because it's not actually that accurate. It's only true in America. In many countries outside of America, 3D fighting games are not only as popular as 2D, but in countries such as Japan, 3D fighting games reign supreme. So what is it about America that makes us so different? I personally think it has to do with instant gratification. We generally tend to not like games that take time to figure out, where the rules of the game have to be exposed and explained to you. If we take, for example, a new player, sit them in front of a TV watching a 3D fighting game, unless they understand 3D fighting games, they may not have an idea of what's going on. Sure, they can watch the characters move around. If it's Soul Calibur, they can see the sword sparks and whatnot, but they don't have a concept of skill. A match between two low-level players and a match between two high-level players may look identical to them. So how can they get hype over a high-level match when they don't even understand the concept of what that means? We can take that same person, sit them in front of a TV watching a 2D fighting game. Depending on the 2D game in question, they can probably immediately tell the difference between high-level play and low-level play. Skill in 2D fighting games can be seen. You can see it in the 10-second long combos typical in the Marvel vs. Capcom. You can see it in the flashes and flares as sequence of cancels are executed in King of Fighters. You can see it when Daigo parries Justin Wong at EVO 2003. Skill in 2D fighting games are very physical, something akin more to athletic sports. Yes, there is strategy, but the majority of the game resides in muscle memory and dexterity. Can you do that 150 hit combo? Are you able to keep the rhythm going for that long without losing it? Can you convert and stretch out small hits into large damage? Skill in 3D fighting games, however, are more mental, something more akin to academic sports like chess. I'm not saying 3D fighting games take more skill. I'm saying the type of skill is different. In 3D fighting games, you have to do a lot of math in your head, calculate averages on the fly, react appropriately with your decisions. They take very little physical dexterity, and because the games are based on knowledge rather than muscle. And therein lies one of the first problems. As a spectator, if you are new to fighting games, you can see the skill in 2D. But it takes patience and understanding before 3D will even begin to make sense to you. The skill in 3D doesn't happen on screen. You can't see someone making 3 or 4 correct decisions in a row. You can't see the numbers or the frame data flying through the player's mind. But in 2D, you can see the player doing a 150 hit combo. You can see a character dying from a single never-ending string. Now I know what you're saying. The game isn't about spectators, it's about the players in the tournament. But you're wrong. Everyone is a spectator, even the players. In a tournament, players in the tournament have to spectate when they're not playing a match. If you're a new player, chances are you're going 2 and out, and the majority of the tournament experience for you is as a spectator. If you cannot enjoy the game as much because you are still new to it, you won't have an overall good experience. 2D fighting games are naturally better for the spectator, and thus it draws a larger crowd. If you watch a stream for fighting games, you'll notice commentary for 2D fighting games and 3D fighting games can be very different. 2D fighting games are very fast, very hard to commentate, but fortunately because the skill is prevalent on the screen, commentary can be irrelevant. Some of the 2D community's commentators don't actually do commentary at all. They are instead hype men. They yell flourishes into the microphone to keep the hype train moving. When something amazing is happening in the game, commentators get hype, and it's fine because as a spectator you can see why they're getting hype. Commentary like that just isn't possible in the 3D community. People have tried, but it just doesn't work. Commentators can get hype, but it doesn't help the spectator because they don't know why there's hype. Good commentary is far more essential in 3D fighting games because there has to be someone there to explain to the less skilled spectators exactly what's going on. They can't just tell them to be hype, they have to tell them why they should be hype in the first place. Now if you want to get into fighting games and you want to have fun immediately, what type of game would you choose? You can choose a 2D fighting game where you can watch the top players, see them doing an amazing string, and say to yourself, I want to be able to do that combo. You can watch top players and know, with a relative degree of uncertainty, what it takes to become a top player. Or you can choose a 3D fighting game. You can watch the top players and say, I don't honestly know why these guys are better than me. What are they doing that I can't? You can't simply watch top players in the 3D fighting game and know where you have to go to reach their levels. Instead, you have to invest time into the game before you can even understand how good these guys really are. As I said at the beginning, in America we love instant gratification. We want to be entertained. We want to be entertained now. Not only do we love instant gratification, we want instant achievement. We want to be successful, and we want to be successful now. What brings about another issue with 3D fighting games, each 3D fighting game is different from the other. We can look to examples of 2D players like Justin Wong or Chris G. They play one 2D fighting game and become successful. When a new 2D fighting game comes out, they try those games and pretty much from day one are successful as well. Most 2D fighting games operate exactly the same way. Sure, there may be minor differences, but if you can do combos in one 2D fighter, you can do combos in another. When it comes down to it, the core mechanics simply do not change. However, when a new 3D fighter comes out, the people who are successful at other 3D fighters, even in the same series of games, may not necessarily become a top player in that community anymore. Except for maybe RTD, the top players in Soul Calibur 2 have not been consistent all the way up to Soul Calibur 5. In fact, many of those players, such as myself, simply don't play Soul Calibur anymore because they were unable to get accustomed to the engine changes. 3D fighting games vary from series to series, and even from game to game within the same series. The engines are not consistent, and to translate from one game to another is very hard. When a new game comes out, you can't instantly achieve success anymore. Often you have to start over from scratch. Sure, you can understand the concept of numbers and the frames, but the numbers are different and how they are applied may be completely up in the air. Another issue we have with 3D fighters is glitches. 3D fighters are not more glitchy than 2D fighters. Every day a new glitch is discovered in some random Capcom fighter that threatens to change the entire meta of the game. Capcom fighters are usually a glitchy mess, but because 2D fighters are based around dexterity, 2D fighters can usually roll with the punches. These glitches increase the physical dexterity requirement because more often than not, glitches require precise inputs. So many times the glitches actually enhance the gameplay for a 2D fighter. In a 3D fighter, the games are based around decision making and mental acuity. Yes, glitches require physical dexterity, but in doing so, it slowly eradicates the core of a 3D fighter, the mind game. In Soul Calibur 2, a glitch was discovered which we call 2G, which yes, did require timing to use effectively, but it greatly reduced the number of choices you had to make in a given situation. It also nullified the advantages one could attain by making a correct read. Glitches tend to simplify things. Why make a choice between option A or B, or even option C, when you can just do a glitch which covers all three? By the end of Soul Calibur 2's life, the game was very turtly and boring to watch. Now, I posted this question up on Twitter and Facebook earlier in the week because I wanted to hear the responses from you guys, my fans, or trolls, or whatever you guys want to call yourself. The most common response I hear from people is they say that 3D is harder to play than 2D, which I disagree. I personally think 3D games are easier to play, but then again, I come from a 3D mindset. I have poor reaction times. I have no physical dexterity. I have sausage fingers. So 2D fighting games are pretty impossible for me. 3D fighting games are slower. I can base my actions on anticipating what my opponent is going to do based on odds and mix-ups and probabilities. I'm a Jew. I'm good with math. I can crunch numbers in my head. People say all the time that Virtua Fighter is the hardest fighter to play, and they're wrong. Virtua Fighter, if you ask me, is the easiest fighter to play, but it's certainly one of the hardest to win at. There is a difference. It takes time and dedication, and certainly doesn't have any sort of instant gratification that you see from most other 2D fighters, especially games like Marvel. Another common response I hear from people is the lack of developer support. Lots of people believe that Soul Calibur is dying because Namco gave up on it, quickly abandoned as a red-headed stepchild to Tekken. And once again, you guys are wrong. Namco dropping development for Soul Calibur 5 is a symptom, not a cause. Anyone who isn't showing up to tournaments because Namco isn't supporting Soul Calibur is the reason why Namco isn't supporting Soul Calibur anymore. If Soul Calibur still had 200 people showing up to tournaments, hell, if we still had 100 people showing up to tournaments, Project Soul would still be pushing out updates. If the 3D community really wants their games to be taken seriously in America, they need to start showing up to events. Soul Calibur had double the entries at EVO than Mortal Kombat 9 this past year. Soul Calibur gets more entries at our East Coast majors than King of Fighters. So why isn't Soul Calibur at EVO this year, yet Mortal Kombat 9 and King of Fighters are? Because the players stopped attending regular tournaments. Except for those East Coast majors, the community isn't showing up to support their game. Why should the developers spend money and time supporting a game they aren't sure anyone is going to care about? Why should major event organizers put an effort into supporting 3D games that only get 50 people? So I'm thankful for both Big E and Shin Blanca for their continued support for our communities. But if we don't return the respect with our own by showing up to their events, telling them that we appreciate what they do, maybe one day they won't be around for us anymore. Now there's something else missing from our community, and that is outreach. I remember back in the Soul Calibur 2 days, community was very open and welcoming. Maybe I was naive back then, but I always felt that there were people who would go out of their way to make sure I enjoyed Soul Calibur as much as they did. Sure, we have players like that now, for instance Ramon from NYC or a great one from Seattle, but that's not enough. If the community wants to grow, it needs to be actively reaching out to new players, inviting them to training sessions, helping people learn the game. And now unfortunately, combo videos in 3D fighting games are mostly irrelevant. Except for Tekken, which isn't actually a full 3D fighting game, combos really don't matter. At least in Soul Calibur, when combos become a core of a character's moveset, we end up with wholly unbalanced and arguably broken characters, such as Hilda in Soul Calibur 4 or Viola in Soul Calibur 5. It's very hard to create appealing videos for new players to 3D fighting games because the best training videos don't involve long combos. Instead, they involve understanding and learning mechanics. And these kind of videos can often feel like a lecture. They're boring, or it's like reading stereo instructions. So the best way to attract new players is to invite them for training sessions. Invite them, where you and your group of friends play Soul Calibur every once in a while. They just train for a next tournament. Invite them. They'll appreciate it. I know I appreciated it back in the Soul Calibur 2 days. Now, the Capcom community doesn't have this issue, and it can be argued they are far more unwelcoming than the 3D communities. But it doesn't matter. They are the most popular. They are critical mass. They don't have to reach out to new players because they are the biggest, and those players really have nowhere else to go, unless of course they decide to pick up League of Legends. If a player wants to play the most popular fighting game in America, Capcom fighters are pretty much the only choice right now. Now I can look at another fighting game community, the Virtua Fighter community. It's possibly the only 3D fighting game community that's growing right now. They are also the smallest, and they've been that way for a long time. But because they're the smallest, they've been reaching out. They're growing. They are reaching out, reaching across the aisle, if you will. They treat every potential new player in their community as good as they would the best players in their community. Not to mention, they show up to events. Yes, numbers are smaller than everyone else. But if their community only has 100 people, and 25 show up to all their tournaments, that's a much larger attendance rate than our community with 1,000 people, where only 50 show up. I can announce a tournament next week in New Jersey, and I can almost guarantee that 5 people from Virginia will show up on short notice. The VF community loves their game, and they are telling everyone, they are showing everyone that they deserve to be recognized. And if we want to be recognized, the other 3D communities, we have to do the same. So if you're still around at this point, I gotta say thank you for listening and allowing me to rant your ears off. This week's topic did come from a YouTube commentator, so if there's a topic you'd like me to discuss, all you need to do is leave a comment below this video or on 8-Way Run, and I'll consider it. If you're interested in 3D fighters, there are several good communities you should check out. Firstly, there of course is my community for Soul Calibur at 8wayrun.com. You can also find the community for Tekken at tekkenzaibatsu.com. The Dead or Alive community can be found at Free Step Dodge, and of course you can find the Virtua Fighter community at virtuafighter.com. And if you like this video, you can find more of my work at my YouTube channel, youtube.com/JaxelRod. You can also subscribe to me on Twitter to get updates about my events and videos at 8-Way Run. And alternatively, if you like to watch tournaments I broadcast live, you can follow me on my channel at twitch.tv/8wayrun. Thank you for your time, and see you guys in the next episode.